Thank you so much, Mona, for the introduction. I've really been looking forward to meeting all of you at the Rotary Club Beirut Cosmopolitan. Thank you for having me. Unheard stories you mentioned in the introduction, it was really driven by the fragmentation in our society and my willingness to find a way to mend it and bridge our divides. Because, it is very easy in this fast-paced, crazy world we live in today, very troubled world, to lose touch with one another, to lose touch with our humanity. We need all the power we can muster, not only to try to put an end to the human suffering, but also to advance the human experience. Your Rotary Club is magnanimous that way. You have a noble mission and you are motivated by empathy, by the love of your community, and by principle. You help raise awareness about those who are less fortunate, about how to be of service to them and how to elevate them. The way you conduct and dedicate your time, actually, and I just watched you conducting your meetings, the way you organize and mobilize to help create the change your community so desperately needs, demands a lot of courage. Because you're not only paying attention to what is going on in the world around you, but you also have the will and the stamina to take action and drive change. And that cannot be accomplished without courage. But the good news is all your hard work and your commitment to your work at the Rotary do not happen without you getting something in return. One of the infallible laws of the universe is cause and effect. Action and equal reaction, Newton's third law. We put good out there, we get good back, and vice versa. Another benefit of giving is that it makes the giver happy, and that's been proven scientifically. When we give, there are these pleasure circuits in the brain that lead to the release of what we call happy hormones, the endorphins, which give us a sense of euphoria. Now, there is a third or additional point I like to make about the benefit of giving and the courage it entails. And that is when we embark on an act of courage, it helps us become even more courageous for future acts. So by giving, we are building up our own courage in the process. Now, what is a good definition of courage? Jim Hightower, an American progressive political activist and a best-selling author, once said, and I quote him, "The opposite of courage is not cowardice. The opposite of courage is conformity," unquote. So in other words, what he's saying is, a good test of courage is our willingness to break away from conformity, our willingness to change, our willingness to shift from one state of mind to another. That's what courage is. I moved to the United States back in 1988, and as a young immigrant, I had to see the whole world, a whole new world, through a completely different lens. Everything was different. The language, the culture, the people, the climate, the food, the water. Still, I had to interact across all these and many other divides. And I had to modify and change not only myself, but the way I saw and interpreted people and their behaviors around me. I learned not to assume things because for the most part, my assumptions were wrong. When we assume, we are relying on preconceived ideas stored in our subconscious mind, and we are no longer thinking for ourselves or opening our minds for something new. So what I did instead instead of assuming. I learned to ask a lot of questions. It's been a humbling journey of continuous learning and growing and changing. It is a conviction of mine today to keep learning, growing, and changing. Now, whether we're immigrants or not, it is imperative that we recognize change as not only necessary, but natural. When we refuse to change, we are actually going against the natural course of things. Everything around us is constantly changing, living and non-living. And it's changing very fast. And things are changing faster today because of the onset of the technological revolution. We can't even keep up with everything that's happening around us anymore. Now, when I talk about change, I am not talking about the normal day-to-day change. I am talking about the change of the deep-seated ideologies that we inherit, the long-stored memories and emotions that we carry around with us on a daily basis, every hour of the day, like a heavy baggage, and that create our blind spots, twist our logic, and impact our behavior. Great minds have been talking about change being imminent and unavoidable for thousands of years. This is not a new concept. If you ask the ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus, for example, about change, he would tell you, quote, "The only constant in life is change." He also said, Heraclitus, and I quote him again, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and he's not the same man." Unquote. Ancient Greeks followed no religion, and their wise philosophy, which dates to as early as 600 BC, is the foundation upon which world civilizations stand today. So the question is, if change is inevitable, why do we fear it? Humans have lived for hundreds of thousands of years. One would think that after all these years, we could have turned fearlessness of change into an instinct. Like we did with curiosity, for example, we turned curiosity into an instinct. But the majority of us still fears change and prefers the status quo. Now, there are so many reasons why this may be the case. So many reasons why we may be terrified of change. But the most prevalent one is simply because change takes away predictability. Change requires us to move away from what is familiar and dive into the unfamiliar, the unknown. Nicholas Carlton, who is a psychology professor at the University of Regina in Canada, describes the unknown as one of humanity's fundamental fears, stressing that it has a more deleterious effect on our behavior than our fear of death. So it takes a lot of courage to overcome our fear of change. It is much easier to conform, to listen to what we are told and follow instructions. And the majority of people do just that. But at what cost? At what cost do we conform? Conformity takes away our personal growth. We lose our spirit when we conform, and with it, the opportunity to discover who we really are and what we are capable of. Each one of us is born with the mental faculties that allow us to think, to process, to analyze, to daydream, to make decisions, and so on and so forth. And these mental faculties include words such as perception, will, reason, memory, intuition, imagination. They set us apart from the rest of the animal kingdom. Each one of them is a powerhouse in and of itself. Now, these faculties are part of our subconscious mind. We need to learn how to use them. We need to use them. Now, what is so dangerous about replacing our higher mental faculties with a conforming state of mind, especially when we look at the level of communities and societies as a whole, is that the people become subject to exploitation, to manipulation, and to abuse by those who rule them. So many countries today are living that plight because the people lack the courage to change. They get stuck in a vicious cycle of corruption and manipulation and don't seem to be able to shake out of it. On the other hand, there are those who are not even satisfied with just riding the wave of change, but find their courage, their inner power to leave their pack, swim through the turbulence of the wave, and get ahead of the game. Now, these become the outliers, the ones we call different, the outside of the box thinkers. These are unfortunately the few. They are the ones who expand our knowledge. They usually end up making history, one way or another. Now, for the most part, they get ridiculed and alienated by their own communities and societies. Many are dubbed betrayers and even lose their heads. History can tell us all sorts of stories. But why? Why do they get rejected? Simply because they do not conform. Change scares people. Do something differently today, and you will find yourself on a collision course with those around you, including your family, your community, your best friends, because you are shaking their accepted laws, the fabric of their daily lives. You are threatening their ideologies and their status quo, and they do not appreciate it. The 20th century greatest scientist, Albert Einstein, was an outlier. His school teacher told him you would never amount to anything because he would sit in the back of the classroom and daydream all day. His father did something similar. On his deathbed, his father called him a disgrace to the family. Einstein was 26 years old, working at a patent office as a third-class patent clerk when he published 4 scientific papers that revolutionized science. Now, at the time, he wasn't even a scientist yet. He ran his imagination wild and refused to box it within the confines of conventional science. He used to sit and play the violin and just imagine things and put them on paper. Now, what happened is that Einstein had a shift in perception. He had to turn his vision 180 degrees in a totally opposite direction. He said gravity is not a force that pulls down on an object, which is Newton's laws, by the way. That's how Newton explained gravity, but rather a force that pushes the object. This shift in perception may seem simple, but it led to Einstein's general theory of relativity that not only accounts for the discrepancies in Newton's laws, but also has profound implications in cosmology, in astrophysics, and their predictions of astronomical phenomena, which we heavily depend on and rely on today in technology. Einstein was an outlier. His vision was disruptive. He challenged more than 2 centuries of scientific thought by challenging his predecessor, Isaac Newton, who was his idol, by the way, and one of the greatest physicists in history. Einstein had the courage and the will to create a whole new science. The scientific community, of course, rejected his theory and criticized it for years. Now, history is full of such stories. It was also Einstein who said, and I quote him, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, unquote. So when we are insane to do the same thing again and again, even though we have seen the results for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and even longer, how do we expect to see change? Can we claim to be victims at that point? Are we not responsible for our predicament? Are we not partners in creating our bleak destiny? We need to change the narrative, and we need to change the way we perceive ourselves. We cannot lament ourselves, look at ourselves as victims, and expect anything productive to happen. We cannot absolve ourselves from responsibility. We cannot be cynical about other people and pessimistic about the future. We cannot refuse to take risks. We cannot feel angry. We cannot be defensive all the time without taking responsibility. We need to change from the victim mindset to the responsible and resolute mindset, and accept that we do have within us the amazing strength to make changes within us first, and then watch them translate into changes around us. If it is to be, it is up to me, said William Johnson. If it is to be, it is up to me. If we expect others to respect us and be kind to us, we need to start by respecting them and being kind to them. If we want them to acknowledge our rights, our space, our freedoms, we need to acknowledge their rights, their space, and their freedoms. Besides, the victim mindset isn't only happening on an individual level. It extends into societies and cultures. And this is where it gets very dangerous. Political parties, heads of states, people of religion, and other powerful, influential entities can instill in their followers the victim mindset. They want their followers to believe that the other side is always here to get them, to marginalize them, to take away their rights and space. People feel victimized and alienate themselves from anyone who's not like them. And that creates waves of prejudice, racism, and xenophobia. Fear rises, anger rises, aggression rises, and conflicts rage through the land. We live thinking that if something is going wrong, it is never our fault because we're victims. It is always their fault. They invaded us. They divided us. They stole our resources. Only if they give us peace, then we shall show them. Well, peace is never given. Peace is attained. Let's not see that our problems are stemmed from outside forces. No one can intrude or drive a schism between us without our consent. It is time to pull together and unite. We all agree on one thing, that the current situation is unbearable. I visited Lebanon this past July, and I heard it from the taxi driver, the concierge, the farmer, the medical doctor, the professor, the grocery store owner. So let's change our story now. Let's take charge of the situation. We have accumulated and internalized so many social habits that need to be modified or recreated, completely recreated. And no one's going to do it for us. We have to do it ourselves. We all feel super healthy until we develop a headache. We all feel powerful, invincible, until one day we are broken. We are always right until one day we realize we were not. Our culture is the best. Our religion is the best until someone kills in the name of our religion. We are all invited tonight to step out of the box that societal stereotypes push us into and redefine who we really are inside out. Let's change our narrative. Let's activate our power. Let's be active listeners. Each one of us has a story to tell. Let's listen to each other's stories. We all have our fears and weaknesses. Let's tune in to each other's fears. We all want the same thing out of life, to live happily, healthily, and peacefully. Let's be active thinkers as opposed to reactive thinkers, relying on stored memories and stored emotions to respond to situations. We have an extremely well-designed brain to assess and analyze every possible situation we find ourselves in. And let's question and question and question again. Let's not accept people's opinions as facts. Let's run our imagination wild and think outside the box. Only then we can expand our circle of knowledge. And let's love each other and realize that we are all interconnected. The idea that we are better divided is an absolute illusion. Segregation lines and towering walls don't solve problems. They are ephemeral. You know why? Because they end up killing what they were supposed to protect. They kill all sorts of life. Encircle any living thing and watch it die. We've been there before. And let's build a strong will that allows us to change without the guilt of betraying our own. All that I talked about, all that change, is a revolving change. It is the journey of 1,000 miles, but it all starts with the first step. Thank you for listening.